the ice as they fell from his cleaved skull. We can only imagine the steam that rose off the contents of Thrain's skull, hot flesh exposed to the icy air, and how his blood seeped into the ice, melting it slightly before cooling again, so that seeping blood and brain froze, sealing the dead man's skull to the ice. When the battle was over, Kari Solmunderson had to chip away the frozen gore before removing what remained of Thrain's head from his shoulders. To him, it was a trophy, evidence of an insult avenged. Even by Viking standards, the ambush was widely condemned by Kari's contemporaries, as he had chosen to ambush Thrain whilst he was unprepared, rather than face him in open combat. But further violence was avoided when Njal married off one of his daughters to Thrain's brother, whilst adopting one of the dead man's son as his own. According to the sagas, the orphan boy was well cared for, and Njal even went on to grant his foster son both chieftaincy and a wife. Yet the sagas rarely have happy endings, and not only did this orphan boy die in a fire intended to kill Kari Solmunderson, the man who'd murdered his father, Kari Solmunderson also goes on to marry the orphan boy's widow. So essentially, throughout the course of his life, Kari takes the father's life, takes the son's life, all before he marries the son's wife. It appears that when the Vikings had blood feuds, there were no half measures, and the amount of justice received was entirely proportionate to the amount of blood you were willing to spill. Picture the scene. It's June of 1462, high summer in Wallachia, the southern province of modern-day Romania. You're a soldier in the Imperial Ottoman army of Sultan Mehmed II, part of an invasion force sent to subdue a local lord, one unwise enough to have made an alliance with one of your sultan's enemies. Wallachia is a small and insignificant fiefdom, merely a stepping stone on the road to the greater prizes of Budapest and Vienna. Subjugating the locals should make for a quick and easy task, you and your comrades think. The Wallachians are backed by a small defensive force. Us Turks have the weight of the empire behind us, not to mention the favor of Allah. But the Wallachians proved more tenacious than first expected, and a nighttime ambush of your encampment leaves many dead on both sides. To your horror, you learn that a dedicated squad of Wallachian soldiers had attempted to fight their way to the center of the camp, no doubt intending on assassinating the Sultan himself. You and your comrades are furious at such a despicable display of dishonor. To you, such a disgrace must not go unavenged. The Sultan only feeds your anger and bloodlust as he promises an immediate march on the regional capital, a city known as Targovishta. Only, as you gather your things and prepare to depart, you hear the news that the Wallachians sent a team of soldiers to butcher as many of the army's horses as possible. As a result, unless you can pillage one on the way, you will be without a trusty mount for the remainder of the invasion. By the time you and your comrades reach Targovishta, you're parched, starving, and utterly exhausted. The entire journey, Wallachian archers picked off your brother in arms from hidden vantage points. And what's worse, the sickly-looking beggars, minstrels, and ladies of the night you met on the way, they weren't just chance encounters. They were walking biological weapons. The Wallachians had rounded up as many walking sufferers of bubonic plague as they could, disguised them, then sent them wandering at your advancing ranks to spread the deadly pox. Over the past few days, men have been dropping like flies. The huge bursting pustules under their armpits invite sepsis and rot. You're terrified, paranoid, and running on empty, but you're still up for the fight. One last push, and it will all be over, the sergeants say. And for now, you believe them. You and your brothers have been prepared to storm the defenses of a well-defended city. You have grappling hooks, rudimentary explosives, bladed weapons of varying sizes, and a wealth of experience in plying your blood-soaked trade. You're prepared for any and all eventualities, all except one. For as mounted Ottoman scouts report back to their commanders, word spreads around the camp that the gates to the city have been left wide open. In fact, the entire city is deserted. Not a single Wallachian has remained behind to defend their home. It's hard to imagine the cheer wouldn't have echoed around the camp. Cries of "God is great" and "God save the Sultan" erupting from every direction. You've seen too much death already. Too many friends have been lost along the way. A prize taken without a fight was just as valuable. You and your brother's soldiers marched toward the city gates, the Sultan and his royal guard at the head of the column. It feels like a victory parade, the beginning of your unstoppable march across Christendom. But little did you know, it's not a victory march. It's a funeral procession. As you watch the first section of troops march through the gates, the first screams rise up from the head of the column. The entire way you can hear more and more of your comrades crying out in horror. You just can't see what they're reacting to. But then, passing through the huge wood and iron gates, you see what horrified them so. And it's an image that will stick with you for whatever time you happen to have left. Bodies. Thousands of them. The main thoroughfare of Targovishta is lined with dead bodies. All are Ottoman soldiers, all your brother's soldiers, and they've been killed in one of the slowest and most torturous ways imaginable. Each man has been impaled on an 18-foot wooden stake, and from the looks of things, whoever had done so had made sure to impale them whilst they were still alive. Even more grotesque is the method of impalement, as the dead men have been pierced vertically, not horizontally, before being mounted at the side of the road. You walk down the city's main drag for almost 30 minutes, and every inch of it is lined with impaled corpses of your compatriots, 20,000 of them to be exact. Most of you are veterans. Even the relatively new soldiers had been seasoned by the march through southern Wallachia. But for some, the sight of what became known as the Forest of the Dead was simply too much to bear. Some of the younger, less hardened troops simply lose their minds there and then, and have to be restrained by their comrades. One might expect some of the greenhorns to snap at such a sight, but even the old salts are ashen-faced and shaken. Men are vomiting in the roads beside them, some are crying, many are praying. One or two even talk of deserting at the first available opportunity. Remember, it is June, high summer in Wallachia, a place where daytime temperatures have been known to reach 112 degrees Fahrenheit. The stench must have been absolutely abominable, a miasma to match an apocalyptic atrocity. Yet on and on you march for mile after mile, breathing in the reek and the rot and the ruin. Once you reach the open country on the other side of Targovishta, the Sultan, obviously shaken by the Forest of the Dead, orders a huge, spike-lined pit to be dug around the camp to prevent the infiltration of the evidently savage Wallachians. Few of you sleep that night. Those of you that manage to get some wake up screaming. But even if you did manage to catch some shut-eye, you'd probably only be woken up moments later anyways. The sentries are jumpy that night. They keep seeing ghosts in the distant darkness, phantom Wallachians that are mere figments of their imagination, and every time they do so, they raise the alarm. They're scared, just like you are. The following morning, the Sultan orders a tactical withdrawal from the area, citing difficulties in your supply lines. You're not retreating. You've not been defeated, don't worry. You'll sack a small town on the way back to Turkey, grab some loot, grab a few slaves, and call it a victory. No one will talk about the Forest of the Dead, not by order of the Sultan. No one must ever know what a crushing display of cruelty was inflicted on the mighty Ottoman, and all by some small fry Balkan, who just so happened to have an insatiable appetite for abhorrent acts of villainy. But who is this monster anyway? One of your fellow survivors asks. He calls himself the son of the dragon, one of the sergeants say. Son of the dragon? The fear in another survivor's voice is palpable. Aye, his father was a knight of the Order of the Dragon, a Dracul, the sergeant replies. So his son, Vladislav, is of the dragon, you see. That is why they call him Vlad Dracula. Dracula. You might be a lowly Ottoman soldier, but you've heard that name before. And it's only now that you begin to understand why a man might have such burning hatred and evil inside of him. Because this isn't the first time Vlad Dracula has encountered Turks. In fact, he's very familiar with them indeed. You see, a young Vlad had once accompanied his father and young brother on a trip to Gallipoli to meet with the Ottoman Sultan. It turned out the reason for the summit was to secure the loyalty of Vlad's father to the Turkish Sultan. But the ruler of Wallachia was struck between a rock and a hard place. He had the Turks on one side, and the comparably powerful Hungarians on the other. If he pledged allegiance to one of them, the other would surely march against him. Vlad's father made a reasonable point, but the Sultan had a better idea. Instead of playing the diplomat, the Sultan simply had Vlad and younger brother thrown into a Turkish prison. If their father's loyalty to the Ottomans wavered, it was heavily implied that the boys would be tortured, executed, and mutilated. It is believed that Vlad spent around 10 to 15 years of his life as a prisoner of the Sultan in the fortress of Elbrigos, but not in the sense you might think. He wasn't kept in a cell constantly, not as time went by anyway, and as his behavior improved, so did his standard of living. But his early 20s, Vlad's life was relatively comfortable. He became a kind of illegitimate son of the Sultan, enjoying the freedom of the fortress and the surrounding area. It didn't matter if he ran. After all, where would he run to? He'd be caught within a day. Befitting his fortress prison, Vlad developed a particular interest in the martial arts. He taught himself to fight with a variety of bladed weapons, and since the Turks had some of the finest archers on the planet at the time, he was in no short supply of archery teachers. Vlad also showed an interest in military tactics and spent a lot of his time poring over old military stratagems, studying maps and soaking